You know, one of the things that our straight brothers and sisters take for granted is if they're married in Canada, they're married in the U.S., or they're married in Spain, or they're married in England. But in the United States, where same-sex marriage is very much a state-by-state issue, it is still possible to have the person you love be deported. We're going to talk about that with our next guest, Camiel Becker of LBG Immigration. Welcome.
Thank you.
So that is true. It is still possible for a same-sex couple to be separated by deportation, correct?
Absolutely. I think one of the the harshest consequences of the Defense of Marriage Act is the way it's applied in the immigration context. DOMA discriminates obviously in ways that penalizes people under the tax code, or you can't call your spouse, maybe your husband or your wife, under state law. But I think the harshest way it penalizes gay couples is it actually rips families apart in the immigration context.
And you've seen this happen?
Luckily, so far we've been able to prevent.
You've been successful.
We've been successful, especially the last year, and we've seen a lot of great progress. It all started in June, actually, of 2011, when the Obama administration issued a memo saying they would close certain deportation cases. And I actually had one of the first cases in the nation that was closed based on a same-sex marriage license here in California in the San Francisco Immigration Court. And that was a really important case, I think, nationally, or that case in conjunction with a couple of others at the national level were really important, because it's kind of set the tone for using this memo to close cases based on a marriage license.
Right. So explain to our viewers what the specifics of that are, because I didn't hear you say that it was based on a quote-unquote same-sex marriage. These were people who had applied, correct?
They were facing deportation,
yes.
And then we presented to the trial attorney in the case and to the judge. We presented evidence that they had a valid marriage license and that the U.S. citizen spouse would suffer hardship if the foreign national were deported. And they used this memo to close cases where there was a marriage between people of the same sex, which was the first time it had happened. And then in August of last summer, after my case was closed, the Obama administration actually said publicly it would consider same-sex marriages for purposes of closing deportation cases.
Right.
And that was huge. And we've seen now nationally, the first case was closed in Houston, Texas recently, which was really exciting, because before it had happened in New Jersey and San Francisco. And it's a little bit potentially a little bit
more
easier.
difficult in Texas than in, say, New Jersey or California, let's be frank.
Precisely.
So the people that are deciding lesbian wife here, lesbian wife here, the person that decides that they are not going to be separated are who? Federal judges?
Under this memo, it's the federal prosecutors. It's actually not a prosecutor, it's a Department of Homeland Security attorney who's actually in charge of deporting people from the country, or lodging grounds of deportation against foreign nationals. So that person decides to use their discretion in a positive way. Right,
so the appointment of these federal officials is very important.
Sure, and I think it matters that they're in a place like San Francisco, where their dentist might be gay, and they might have friends who are gay.
But the deportations are still going on. It is still possible for a same-sex couple that has been together for years, let's say Virginia, my home state, where there is right now a law banning same-sex marriage. One person could be deported.
Absolutely, it could happen, and it probably will continue to happen, but especially if you have maybe a DUI conviction somewhere in that case, or you have some kind of negative factor. Luckily, so far, I've had a number of these cases, and actually some of them are pending right now with same-sex couples that are either in domestic partnerships or in marriages, and we are able to successfully get them deferred, or we can get the government to potentially agree to close them. But those cases, luckily so far, have not had criminal issues, for example. Whereas if you were straight and you had a DUI, you could still get your green card. But then the trial attorney might look at the case and say, okay, well, you're gay and you have a DUI, I'm going to deny it. So it's not an affirmative benefit. It's a defense and a plea to the department to use their discretion in a favorable way.
So again, until there is a marriage equality, a same-sex couple has to work harder with this issue than a straight couple.
Definitely. And they're still denying visa petitions.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. Someone who wants to get a visa into the United States, if you're gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, is it more of an uphill climb?
Sure, and if you're in a same-sex relationship, if you're coming, as a visitor, there could be a problem if your U.S. citizen spouse is living here, because it shows that you have the intent to live here permanently. And as a visitor, you have to have the intent to go back to your home country. So it could just having that relationship could cause hurdles for you.
Right. And which countries, I don't want to say do it right, but which countries vis-a-vis LGBT issues have the most progressive policies around this?
Oh, I think there are lots of countries that allow, same-sex couples to petition for each other. Australia allows it. Spain allows it. There are a number of countries that recognize same-sex marriage. If they recognize same-sex marriage federally, then usually they allow immigration benefits.
Right. Now, immigration, of course, is something that is controlled by the federal government. How important or impactful are local state laws vis-a-vis LGBT issues around issues of immigration? For instance, as you said, you got lucky in Texas. Is a couple in Kentucky going to have more trouble than a Kentucky in California, or not California at the moment, let's say Iowa, which has same-sex marriage?
Sure, I think because the only benefit at this point is this discretionary power that's kind of expanded to potentially include same-sex couples. You're asking for that benefit with somebody who hopefully who wants to use their discretion in favor of same-sex couples, but that's only if you're in San Francisco or Houston, Texas, apparently. But that might not be the case if you're in another part of the country. So, I mean, it's so discretionary. It's really kind of, it's just an uncertain attempt that you're trying to.
Now, your practice deals specifically with LGBT immigration issues. Is this a growing practice? I mean, this is the sort of thing that didn't exist, this sort of specialty, even a few years ago.
Yeah, well, my practice is broader than just LGBT immigration, but I do have a component of my practice that works specifically on LGBT immigration.
Well, and how much of a growing issue is this?
It's huge. I mean, especially in San Francisco. We have a lot of people who are in a position where they're facing deportation, or they want to stay here to get married, or maybe they lost their job if they're on an H-1B, some kind of work visa. Things fall apart, and they fall in love in the meantime.
Right.
I mean, it's huge, and I hear cases all the time, where the cases where people are afraid to go back because they're persecuted in their home countries.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. I knew a young man who came here from Chile several years ago, and he felt that he was persecuted in his home country, and he petitioned to stay, but it was not guaranteed. I mean, how real are those dangers? For instance, as an example, let's say there's a young gay man in Iran who wants to come here. Well, he petitions to come here, and the issue is, I'm going to be persecuted in my country. Well, gosh, he better not lose that, because now he's known as a gay man in Iran. That's not real great.
Yeah, I mean, I think if Iran's probably a little easier to get asylum from than Chile, because I think it's pretty clear that you're probably going to get the death penalty if you're from Iran and you're gay and you're out. Someone's probably going to torture you or imprison you. So that's a little bit easier to win asylum. But if you're from another country where the persecution isn't, as broad and as commonplace, then you have to prove that that you are going to be attacked because you're gay, and that's a harder burden of proof. So,
right. But again, to my point, if you, just by making the case, if you lose, you're branded.
Yes, yeah, and when you go back, it's even worse. And some countries, like Iran, will actually know that you've been deported. If you lose, you're going to end up with a deportation order, and they will find out when you get back.
And so your life could be in danger.
Even more so, yeah.
Let's talk about another issue. I'm sure you've been following the recent story of the two gay men in Southern California that were arrested in Dominica on the Atlantis cruise. What can you say about that? How likely is that? I mean, I know I was stunned as someone who goes on cruise vacations often. I've never done an all-gay cruise. But the idea that I could be on a ship and have authorities come on board and arrest me for my sexuality and then imprison me for 19 hours and subject me to taunts and not be defended by the gay company, that to me is kind of staggering. What did you think of that case?
Sure. I mean, I think it goes to show that even places as close as Caribbean islands have some places have a pretty poor track record on LGBT rights. You know? I mean, I think where people are mistreated, and if they can mistreat foreigners who, you know, more likely than not have a certain amount of privilege and protections.
They're spending money in their country.
They're spending money, and they have supposed to have the protection from of the cruise ship. I mean, it goes to show that people who are living there are probably living under really poor conditions if they're out in any way. Yeah.
What are the worst countries vis-a-vis the countries that would be most likely to have someone petition to come to the United States for fear of persecution in their own home?
Oh, I think people are coming from all over. I mean, people, and they're not necessarily always with asylum. They're sometimes getting here, you know, on visitor visas and then claiming fear of returning. They get here however they can. If they're really fearing for their life, they come from Mexico. They come from Central America. They come from India, Iran. You know, they come from all over the world. There's persecution, I mean, all over the African continent, for example, based on LGBT status. So, I mean, it's happening everywhere.
Right. Now, in the last 20 years, I imagine people being open about applying to the United States for asylum because of LGBT persecution in their home country. Those numbers have probably gone up because the United States wasn't always friendly to these sort of petitions, correct?
Yeah, well, there wasn't a basis for asylum based on LGBT persecution up until probably, I'm going to guess, 15 or 20 years ago. That it started to there started to be cracks in the asylum law, and then eventually there was case law that established it. A few cases were granted. Then finally, at least in the West Coast here, in the Ninth Circuit established a protected ground for people who are fearing persecution based on their LGBT status.
What's the most difficult or moving story that you recall, without revealing, of course, confidentiality, that you've dealt with about a couple that was either going to be separated or someone who was trying to get asylum and couldn't?
I say that probably the couple their case was recently closed. They were a same-sex couple. One of them was facing deportation. And I think just that win was when we were able to get him a work permit based on an application that was filed in immigration court proceedings. And he and his partner thought maybe they would be separated permanently. And I think just dealing with the fight, you know, month after month for about a year and a half, and just finally seeing on their faces a little bit of peace when their case was closed, and they know that unless there's a change in the administration, their case will probably remain to be closed, and he'll be here with work authorization until hopefully the Defense of Marriage Act is repealed, and then they can petition for him. So to win that case was really
gratifying.
Nice thing.
In our last few moments, how long before you think we'll have full marriage equality in this country?
Oh, that's tough. I wish I knew. I'm hopeful it'll be within the next couple of years.
Hopefully you're right. We've been speaking with Camiel Becker, our authority on LGBT immigration issues. I'm David Perry, your host for 10%. Thanks for watching, and we'll hope you tune in next week. Good night.